Hello and welcome to the first ever Sinclair Fitness podcast. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of my personal favourite subjects, programming for hypertrophy. In other words, how do we put on as much lean tissue as possible? Do we simply just waddle into the gym and make it up as we go along, or do we have a well thought out, precise plan to ensure that we yield the best gains possible out of our training? So I'm going to say B, you want to have a well thought out plan, and it's this plan that I want to talk to you about today. So I want to make this extremely clear. There is no such thing as a perfect program, just perfectly applied principles. And it's these principles that I want to discuss today. I want to outline the thought process. So where do you start? Okay, the best place to start is something called specificity. Specificity is kind of an obvious one, but it's being specific to your goals and outlining the individual in front of you and how that goes into your planning. So for example, we've already kind of outlined our goal. We want to build muscle, add tissue to the frame. All our further decision making will branch out from this singular goal. How we execute exercises, the exercises we select, how much volume we do, how many sets, how many reps, how long it takes to recover from it. Okay. Second is the individual. Now, not everyone responds the same to training. We know this. There's an inter-individual difference between sexes, between ages. So something I want to outline that's extremely important to understand is the difference between your biological age, so the number on your driving license, and your training age. So you could have a biological age of 20, but have a training age of 2. So you've been training consistently for 2 years. It's this training age that really determines one of the biggest inter-individual differences. What we know is if you're completely new to training, like a sponge, you'll put on a lot of tissue in a very short amount of time. And then what you'll see is plateau maybe after 6 months or a year. Everyone has their own genetic ceiling. And the closer you are to that genetic ceiling, the harder it is to get a gain. So for example, if I was an elite level sprinter and I wanted to shave 0.01 seconds off my 100 meter time, that could take 2 years of training. While if I was completely new to sprinting, I could probably shave off seconds with a good bit of sprinting. So it's an appreciation that the first thing we need to take into consideration with any individual is their training age. If someone's got a very advanced training age, they're going to need more advanced techniques, drop sets, supersets. They're going to need more work, more volume. We're going to have to get a little bit more cute and complicated. For me personally as a trainer, if I'm working with a beginner, my programming isn't that complicated. There's nothing that needs to be complicated. What if you're new to training, if you're new to the gym, what you need to focus on is execution, technique, and doing the basics properly. If you're more advanced, then you're going to have to start using more advanced techniques. So the technique we use, essentially, we want to divide our trainees into, are you a beginner? That's 0 to 6 months. Are you intermediate? That's 6 months to 2 years. And then advanced 2 years beyond. Okay, that's the first part of specificity. Secondly, sex. Women aren't just small men, believe it or not. They have different hormonal profiles that will affect a certain amount of our training thought process. So obviously men have more testosterone. Testosterone binds to androgen receptors, means you can build more lean tissue. So men can build more muscle than men. Men tend to recover not so quick, actually. Women tend to recover quicker than men. That's because the more muscle you have, the more weight you can lift, therefore the more fatigue you can incur. While women tend to recover a lot better and have much better endurance than men. And the most important thing with women is understand that their hormonal profiles are different. So with women, we need to take into consideration the menstrual cycle. So essentially you have 2 hormones that peak depending on the phase of the ovarian cycle. So you have, during the first phase, the follicular phase, we know that estrogen peaks. And estrogen is actually quite a good thing. It binds to androgen receptors in tissue and can be quite anabolic. And then what happens in the luteal phase, or the second part, when we start to shed that endometrial lining, is progesterone peaks and estrogen goes down. And this is where women don't feel as good, they don't feel as strong. And what happens is their core body temperature increases. So in fact, they burn more calories. So for example, if I had a woman who wanted to lose weight, what I would do, we would identify where her second phase of the cycle was, and I would give her more calories, essentially. So this is an example of taking the individual in front of you. So that the first principle when it comes to programming is specificity to the individual. We also need to consider injuries and body type. So I'm going to say something a little bit controversial. So not everyone fits every single exercise. There are some people, due to their morphology, the length of their limbs, the cards they've just simply been dealt to them, that can't do or shouldn't do certain exercises, or even the exercise itself targets a different part of their musculature. For example, your classic, I would say, lanky person, they're all limbs, they're tall, they're slim. You try and get them to squat, it looks more like a good morning, they're bending over. A lot of that shear force is going through their back. This needs to take it into consideration because not everyone has the same skeleton. So it's programming for the training age, for their sex, for the skeleton, and finally if they've got any underlying injuries. Now, as a personal trainer, my job isn't to fix injuries. When it comes to pain, that's not my remit. It's a physiotherapist remit. But it is my job to put a physiotherapist out of business by not injuring my clients and bulletproofing my clients. So if a client walks in and they've got a laundry list of injuries, my first thought is you need to go see a physiotherapist firstly, and I need to communicate with them. But then we need to consider, okay, so you've got a history of back pain. Can we strengthen your core? And should avoid exercises that stress the lower back, like deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts? Can we adjust it? So this is what I mean by specificity. It's just, you can't take a generic program and apply it to everyone. You need to take into account the individual. So I'll go over this again. I covered training age, sex, morphology, and injury history. And obviously goal, but because this is hypertrophy training, we've already identified our goal. So that is specificity. Okay, second topic, something that I really, really want to hammer home. Okay, another thing to consider. I don't really care how complicated your periodization scheme is. I don't care how many sets and reps you're doing. I don't care how elaborate your exercise selection is. One of the most important things is your execution and your technique. If you're always getting injured, it doesn't really matter about your program. And if you're not creating enough intensity or intention within your hypertrophy training, it doesn't matter about the exercise selection. So what I mean is, I can make 4 sets kind of challenging and get a okay stimulus, or I can make 2 sets extremely intense and challenging and then walk away and yield more hypertrophy, more stimulus. So there's a really important principle to understand, that is creating internal focus. When it comes to adding more muscle to your frame, you want to make it precise and challenging. So let's take a bicep curl, for example. I want to go to actual failure, proper failure. So there's this really cool study, and it always makes me laugh when I read this study. So I took a bunch of your typical sports science students, participants, divided them into 2 groups, and the aim of the study is to, do people actually go to failure? Can people precisely self-describe when they go to failure, or are they cutting themselves short? So the study was, they divided these people into 2 groups, and one of them was like, self-select, you're gonna go to what you think is failure, and we're going to record that. And the second group, you're going to go to what you think is failure, and then we're going to scream and shout at you and make you do more. So what happened was, the group that failed did 10 reps, and the group who were pushed and screamed at by their assistants went to like 19 or 20 reps. So this study really outlines that generally people are quite poor at knowing when they go to failure. Now, going near failure or proximal to failure is one of the key mechanisms for driving hypertrophy. So if most people are bad at understanding when they go to failure, what it tells me is most people do not push themselves hard enough. You need to know what it's like to go to real concentric failure, because this creates the largest stimulus possible. The people who put on the most tissue are locked in, and they absolutely torture the muscle with some precision to the point where they can't lift their arm anymore. We've got this psychological mechanism called the central governor theory, where unsurprisingly the body doesn't want to be in too much physical discomfort, so it puts on the emotional handbrakes. You probably felt it. You go sprint as high as you can, and your body goes, whoa, 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 stop what you're doing. If you really want to put on some tissue and you're an intermediate to advanced trainee, you really have to learn to push into failure hard, okay? Most people do not train hard enough. Know what it's like to go to failure. Find an exercise that's appropriate for failure, like a bicep curl or a leg extension or a hamstring curl, and just push yourself to the point where no matter how hard you try, you cannot contract your fibers anymore. Also, when I'm talking about execution, I'm talking about tempo. Now, what's often said is, tempo, increases muscular tension, which I don't know what that means. But why tempo is important in controlling the weight is you want to remove inertia. Essentially, if you suddenly launch the weight up, if you can imagine doing a bicep curl and you contract as hard as you can, what you're doing essentially is throwing the weight. The weight becomes weightless for a temporal amount of time. As the weight becomes weightless, that means there's no tension occurring on those motor units, so there's no stimulus. So what you want to do is contract that muscle as slow as possible and as hard as possible. Let's say I've got 10 kilograms on my bicep curl. I want to make that feel like it's 100 kilograms. And I just a little caveat, you don't want to have a contraction that's beyond 4 seconds. So somewhere between 1 and 4 seconds, you want to squeeze that muscle as hard as you can, remove inertia from it. Therefore, the motor units do the work and there's more mechanical tension. Okay, so the point I want to make is control your tempo, work hard to failure, okay? And don't get injured. And the best way not to get injured, firstly, don't lift like a dickhead. Don't flip your body around, use body English. Be precise. What we know is you can actually create a hypertrophy stimulus with anything between 1 and 30 reps. I repeat, 1 and 30 reps. So it tells us that weight isn't that important. What is important is precision. And what you hear a lot is progressive overload. That's the main driver of hypertrophy. It's like, yeah, maybe, but I think the message that gets lost is add more weight. You should never have to add weight at the compromise of your tempo, your technique, and your internal focus. Every single rep should look exactly the same, apart from the last 1 or 2 where you're going to get a velocity slow when your muscle fibers are trying to contract as hard as possible and you're reaching fatigue. But you don't want to just add weight to the bar and then fling the weight around because it's progressive overload, okay? Execution and proper technique and removing inertia from your lifts will yield much better gains than flipping around like a dolphin, okay? Okay, let's get onto the sexy stuff. Let's talk about sets. So sets, reps, rep ranges, volumes. There's a lot of research that's gone into this, actually. It's a really interesting discussion going on in the evidence-based community about comparing 2 methodologies when it comes to... So when I say volume, I mean the total amount of sets you do per body part per week. So for example, I do 10 chest exercises. What's better? 10? Is it 20? Is it over 2 sessions? Is it 1 session? Is it 3 sessions? Because there's such an inter-individual difference, for an individual it is absolutely impossible to say unless you do the same exercises for a year round, eat the exact same food, sleep the exact amount of time, and have the exact same stress. My methodology is I want to hit every body part twice a week. If I really want to push a body part, I would hit it 3 times a week, but I would keep everything else at 2 times a week. So I like to hit every body part twice a week. As far as the total amount of sets, I like a low volume, high intensity approach. So what I said previously about creating internal focus, you can make 2 sets yield a lot more gains than 4 sets of half-arsing it. So I think I do 5 sets of chest on Monday on my upper body day, and I do another 5 sets on Thursday. And then you want to divide your body part. So if you have a body part that you want to bring up compared to everything else, what I would suggest is you have 2 options. You can either add more volume on that day, or you can add an extra day or frequency. It is really impossible with clients to really identify exactly what is the right amount of volume just by looking at them. The only way is to do a call and response with their programming. So what I mean is, I like to think of like volume like this for a body part. I'm a chef and I'm whipping up a tasty meal, and unfortunately where it says salt, it's slightly smudged. I know there's some salt that they need, but I'm not sure how much salt. So what do? I take a tiny pinch of salt and I pour it in my dish and I stir it, give it a little while, and then I try it, see how that tastes, and then from that I make a decision on how much more salt. Now maybe that is the perfect amount of salt because we're seeing good results. Maybe that's not enough salt, so I add a little bit more salt. It's a very delicate technique. And what you see with a lot of gym bros is they go in and they just throw a fistful of salt into their dish, and guess what happens there? The muscle doesn't grow, because we know with too much volume, too many sets, you actually get a negative return. So if there's a point where you get a negative return, why would you go in and do smash 20 sets of bench press straight off the bat? No. What you want to do is you want to be controlled, you want to be measured, you want to put in a little bit of salt, try it, put in a little bit of salt, try it, put in a little bit of salt, try it. This is why I don't like just programming and leaving people to get on with it. There needs to be a call and response. You need to be your own scientist. You need to create a stimulus, do low volume chest exercises, see how you respond. If you're like, oh, that was easy, I can definitely do another set. Yeah, if we add another set, and then we'll add another set, and then you will reach a point where you go, oh no, I can't recover from that, and then you have a profile. Then you'll know. Like, I know that I can't do more than 10 a week. 100%, because I've been training for a number of years. I've got clients who I know that their quads can't take more than 12 sets per week, because we've gone and we've put that profile together over time. There's been a call and response. I've asked them to measure it subjectively, then we've made a decision. So this is what I want to say, because if you're familiar with Mike Isotel and the maximum recoverable volume methodology and the minimum recoverable volume, which is basically this, there is actually a number for everyone that you can be precise with straight off the bat, and that isn't true. It doesn't work in theory, because so many things go into your ability to recover. Your sleep, your stress, your food, the type of exercises. Not all quad exercises are the same. Some cause more muscular damage or more eccentrically dominant than others. Some are easier to recover from, and this could depend on the exercise itself and your own morphology. Some people, because they're bigger and stronger, can cause more muscular damage. So rather than having some kind of rigid methodology, it's just simply your volume should be a call and response. I would, every single body part would start with 2 sets, and then just add a set if you think you can do a set and you're recovering within 72 hours. If you're recovering within 72 hours, you can add a set. If you're still recovering within 72 hours, you can add a set. If you're not recovering within 72 hours, don't add a set, because the evidence does suggest that the more you can do, the more you can grow. But you need to put the effort into finding out how much you can do, rather than just running out and doing as much as possible. I think that covers volume. Intensity I covered. So intensity, it would be for hypertrophy training. I alluded to this earlier, but there's a very wide rep range. The evidence, it was a really good study that showed, it's very recent, I think the last 5 years, that you can yield hypertrophy as long as you go to failure, which I talked about before, as long as you're between 5 and 30 reps, which gives us a lot to play with. But the way I like to do it is, the 2 major stimuluses for hypertrophy are mechanical tension, so lifting something heavy, and metabolic stress. So mechanical tension, so lifting something heavy, as well as accumulating tabulate, so higher reps. So, you can do different phases, you can do loads of acute, complicated stuff. Because these 2 adaptations I didn't mention this, there's 2 kinds of hypertrophy, arguably. There's sarcoplastic hypertrophy and microfibral hypertrophy. So you can either increase the fluid around the muscle, or you can increase the muscle fibers. One of them is much better for strength, one of them is much better for just aesthetics and the muscle looks bigger. The point is, it doesn't really matter. Both of these will make the muscle look bigger, which is what our goal is for hypertrophy training. Okay, so if both of these things make our muscle look bigger, one of them happens at high reps, one of them happens at low reps, and they're compatible, so we can actually create that stimulus within the same session, and they won't interfere with each other. The smart thing to do is to do both the same things in the same sessions. So the way I set up my intensity was, let's say I've got my bench press, I will do 2 what we call top or heavy sets, somewhere between 8 and 6 reps. For hypertrophy training, I'm a firm believer there's absolutely no need to go into the 1 to 5 rep range. We're not power lifters. What we know is about very heavy sets is they cause a lot of neuromuscular damage and fatigue, which is going to take a long time to recover from. Like, if you are into aesthetics and bodybuilding, doesn't matter how strong you are. It's kind of irrelevant. It's like, no one cares about your 1 rep bench, so don't waste your time. What you want to be strong, but it's probably better to be stronger in that 8 to 6 rep range. Okay, so you've got 2 or 1 sets, what we call top sets, where we're trying to drive that microfibral hypertrophy, and then we've got some back off sets, so we've got somewhere between 12 and 15. So we're getting the best of both worlds. So we're getting stronger, we're getting stronger, and we're getting more fluid in the muscle, and then therefore we yield just more hypertrophy altogether. There are some exercises that aren't conducive to like lower reps, so like you shouldn't really be doing low reps on bicep curls, or what we call open chain exercises, where there's more what we call shear force. So shear force is just tearing force. If you can imagine like tearing a bit of paper in half, when we lift the weight, the gravity, you're pulling the weight up and gravity's taking it down, and the joint is experiencing something called shear. Now, shear isn't bad, but too much shear is bad. So if you go and jump into a leg extension, you try and do your 1 RM on a leg extension, you're creating so much shear force. So there's some exercises that are very conducive to higher reps, and some exercises that are conducive to lower reps. And just be aware that what we call closed chain exercises. So your squats, your deadlifts, your big compounds are much better for lower reps, and while higher rep exercises are your more open chain exercises like bicep curls, isolation exercises. Okay, that covers sets and reps. Let's add on to this. So we've taken our individual into account. We've identified that we're just going to build up on volume. We're going to identify that. We've identified that the best kind of sets and rep schemes are a mixture within the same sessions. There's no need to do any physique approach when it comes to hypertrophy training. One of the most important things is monitoring. A lot of people don't monitor. So what's monitoring? So monitoring is basically testing as you go along, so you can make the most informed decision you can based off the information presented by you. So when it comes to hypertrophy training, which is the ultimate goal, to get as jacked as possible, it isn't just about lifting weights. It's about how many calories you're eating per day, how much protein you're eating per day. Also, you grow when you rest. So are you sleeping well enough? What's your digestion? What's your total stress level at allostatic load? If we measure all of these variables, then we can adjust them, because you can't manage what you don't measure. If you ever want to know how the pros do it, and people who succeed do it, they manage and measure everything that affects their outcome. So for my clients, what gets measured is obviously how much they weigh, visuals, but then beyond that, everything affects that. So calories, protein, or we look at biomarkers. So we always want to be measuring fatigue in some way. Overtraining is a real thing, and you can reach a point with training where you actually have a negative feedback. You have become so stressed, the system is so overrun that it will no longer put on tissue, and it will prioritize other metabolic pathways. So we want to avoid overtraining, and the way to avoid training is to measure total stress or allostatic load. So there are a number of different ways. Subjective stress is fine. So you can simply, every day, you fill in a tracking sheet. How stressed do I feel? How sore do I feel from 1 to 10? And then you also want to be looking at your logbook. If you are trying to put on tissue, you should be getting stronger. Not every session, but you should be progressing every session. Every session you should be getting stronger. If those numbers start going down, and then we look at your subjective measures, like how motivated are you to train today? How sore are you to train today? These are going down. This is telling us that you're overtrained and it's time for a deload. So this is an example of monitoring. Another thing we can look at is objective measures of fatigue, like something called HRV, which is just the space between every single heartbeat, which tells us, is your body in a parasympathetic state or a sympathetic state? So is it in a stress state or is it in a rest state? Obviously a little bit of stress isn't bad, but we want that switch to go from you're in the gym, you're smashing it, you listen to heavy metal, you're caffeined out of your brain, you create your stimulus, you're in that sympathetic mode, that fight or flight mode, you want to fight, and then as soon as you leave the gym, the switch goes, you're in that parasympathetic state for the rest of the day. This will yield much better gains, and we can actually objectively measure this through something called your HRV. Okay, you can use either a heart rate strap and an app or a ring. This is monitoring. This will inform our process. I mean, I could go on for ages. There's lots of like hormonal profiles you could use. You could use force plates. We can get into loads of geeky sports science stuff. But what you should be doing with your hypertrophy training is monitoring, okay? Am I going in the right direction? Is everything working like it is? What are my measures? And it can be something very simple like subjective measures. It doesn't have to be something complicated like an objective measure. The main things you're looking out for are, am I stressed? Am I sleeping right? How's my digestion? And then from there, we can adjust the program, because you will never write a program, or a program will never be written and it will be perfect for you, tailored for you. There does need to be a call and response. And we also need to look at things outside of your training that will affect your training. And this is monitoring. Okay, cool. So this is going to be the last bit. So this is actually exercises. We're actually going to talk about exercises for hypertrophy. Exercise selection will depend on your individual goal. There are no must-do exercises. I'm going to repeat this. There are no must-do exercises. Also, hypertrophy training is not just powerlifting with higher reps. There are a few exercises that are held up on a pedestal that are like non-negotiables and must-dos. So that squat, bench, the deadlift. No. You don't have to do these exercises, and these exercises might not yield more hypertrophy for you specifically. So the thought process that goes into exercise selection is your anatomical individualities. Like I said, for example, not everyone should bench press. Like For example, the bench press, your hands are fixed, so you can't rotate the wrist how they would naturally. Not everyone has a thick enough rib cage, so they have to go down super low, and they have to go into something called their passive range. So passive range is simply where the weight is pushing you into that rather than your neuromuscular system controlling it. That can be problematic and create injuries because you can't create stability around the joint. So you want to select exercises that are conducive to your body type, essentially. And there's no way of knowing that without a proper analysis or a coach in front of you. As far as like hypertrophy training goes, you want to have a combination of dumbbells and machines. The good thing about machines is they're stable and they're precise, okay? And you want to take a biomechanical approach to your exercise selection. So what I mean is, when it comes to hypertrophy training, you want as much stimulus as you can get for that full range of motion. So if you can imagine doing a bicep curl, all the way through that range, I don't just get hypertrophy like globally to the muscle. I get it in specific regional areas. And the reason you get hypertrophy in regional areas is because there are areas where the weight is lightest and the parts of the range where the weight is heaviest. Okay, and we'll repeat that. 10 kilograms is not 10 kilograms for that full range of motion. So with a bicep curl, it's light, it gets heaviest in the middle, and then it gets lighter as it gets to the top. Now, I won't get into the why, because it gets all geeky and biomechanical, but I have an appreciation that very few exercises have something called a congruent resistance curve. So what we want tension through that whole range of motion rather than the partial range of motion. So you know this, if you do a squat is the heaviest at the bottom where the quads and the glutes are the most stretched, and it's lightest at the top. In fact, you could stand with 300 kilograms like unracked on your back like for hours. The second you try and go down to the bottom, probably not getting up from that squat. So what we want to do is we want to create exercise programs that stimulate the muscle through the full range of motion. So how do we do that? Well, there's two ways. You could put exercises together that have a full resistance profile. So let's talk about the glutes. We know that the Romanian deadlift, which is one of my favorite glute exercises, stimulates the glutes in the most lengthened position. Okay, as we get to the top, it gets lighter. So we need an exercise that stimulates, or the muscle is the weight is the heaviest in the shortened position. Well, we can have a hip thruster. Okay, cool. So we've got hip thruster, and then we've got Romanian deadlift. Okay, I said twice a week, didn't I? So let's have hip thruster on Monday, Romanian deadlift on Thursday. And what else did I say? I said we want to have a mixture of rep ranges. Okay, so how about Romanian deadlift? You want to do 6 to 8 reps, and then 10 to 12 reps, and then the same rep scheme on your glutes. And I will guarantee you that will build your glutes. And what you do is you keep going with that. You keep going. You don't change exercises when you get bored. The only time you change exercises is when you don't progress anymore with good form. You absolutely milk that for everything it's worth. Okay? And that's how you yield hypertrophy. So let's take another example. The lats. We want to work the lats in the most lengthened position. That would be like a pull down where the weight's the heaviest. Great. So let's put pull down, let's say Monday. Okay, let's put what's a good lat shortened position? Let's do a pull up. Okay, there we go. So it's a biomechanical approach. So we want to try and create as much stimulus as we can for that full range of motion, and we can only do that by combining exercises. Or there's another technique where we can create a congruent strength curve. For example, I'm on the leg press, which is a great quad exercise. We band that up. So when we band that up, that means it gets heavier as we get weaker, and it's a biomechanical approach to exercise selection. So the point I want to make is you need to get out of this must-do exercise mindset. That, there are no must-do exercises. All exercises are made up. If you know what exercises are made up of, you can manipulate them a little bit more. Because the problem with personal training and coaching is become a little bit like choreography. Oh, it looks right. It looks, it's more like a dance move than really understanding what's underneath the hood. And it really takes a coach who's studied biomechanics to understand what's under the hood, a program for the individual and the individual needs. Anyway, I hope this helps. This was about programming for hypertrophy, the thought process that goes into it. Peace out.